So, imagine walking into a neighborhood, right? And you are armed with this brilliant, fully funded plan.
Oh, yeah, we see this all the time.
Right. I mean, it is designed from top to bottom to just solve all of this community's problems. You have the charts, you have the financial backing, the board's approval, and you have the absolute best of intentions.
You are so excited to get to work.
Exactly. You walk in ready to change lives, only to realize, like within a few weeks, that no one wants your program, no one trusts your team.
Yeah, it's rough.
And worst of all, you slowly discover that your brilliant plan doesn't actually address the real issue that is keeping people awake at night.
It is a devastating realization. You just feel completely deflated. And yet, if you talk to anyone who has spent time in community work, leadership, urban planning, really anything like that, they will tell you that this exact scenario is one of the most common repeating failures of human interaction. I mean, we see it everywhere.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are looking at why well-intentioned people, whether they are, leaders, volunteers, managers, or just neighbors, so often end up doing more harm than good when trying to, quote-unquote, fix a community.
Yeah, and we have a really incredible source text for this today.
We do. We are unpacking the core insights from a profound document titled Listening to Local Voices. And we are specifically diving into Chapter 5 today.
Which is just a gold mine.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the spiritual, moral, and highly practical discipline of truly hearing a place. Because whether you are a community organizer, an educator, or honestly just someone trying to understand the people you live and work around, we are going to extract the wisdom of how to stop talking over people and start listening beneath the surface.
Which is so crucial because, I mean, in our hyper-fast, data-driven world, it is incredibly easy to confuse having data on people with actually understanding people.
Yes, that is such an important distinction.
Right, like we pull up a spreadsheet, we look at income brackets, crime statistics, or attendance records, and we convince ourselves that the spreadsheet is telling us the story of a street.
And if you are listening to this right now, on your commute or, sitting at your desk, you probably run into this all the time. You look at an engagement report at work or you read a demographic breakdown of your city on the news and you think you know what's going on.
Exactly.
But this deep dive is really your shortcut to recognizing the hidden architecture of the places you live and work.
And to really grasp this, we kind of have to set the backdrop, because a community is never a blank page waiting for an outsider or a new leader to just come write their brilliant ideas on it.
Never.
Right. Every neighborhood, every office, every school tells a profound, complex story long before any outsider speaks a single word. I mean, the story is already written in the routines of the market stall vendor who arrives before dawn to set up.
Yeah, the daily rhythms.
Exactly. It's written in the tired smile of the school teacher managing a crowded room with too few resources, but, an abundance of care. It's woven into the mother who knows intuitively exactly which streets feel safe after dark, and the quiet porches at dusk where the elders watch the block.
Wow, yeah.
That is the tapestry. That is the living, breathing reality we are stepping into whenever we enter a new space.
And that beautiful, complex tapestry is exactly what gets destroyed when we walk in with our binders and our assumptions, right?
Precisely.
The author of our source material actually calls this the trap of the blueprint. It's this phenomenon where good intentions curdle into what the text calls presumption.
Yeah, presumption. That is a strong word.
It is. The claim here is incredibly bold. It argues that well-meaning outsiders frequently enter a community with a message already formed, a plan already settled, and assumptions completely locked in place.
Yes, and using the word presumption there is very deliberate. The argument is that jumping to solutions before doing the hard work of listening isn't just a bad management strategy. It is a moral disorder.
Wait, a moral disorder?
Yeah, it is a failure of character. The author points to ancient wisdom here, citing Proverbs 18.13, which says, "If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame."
Folly and shame. I mean, that is a heavy indictment for someone who might just be trying to start, like, a free tutoring program or a neighborhood cleanup.
It sounds harsh until you realize the collateral damage of presumption, because what you are doing when you presume is you are treating a living, breathing community, a place full of Deep memory, collective grief, and hard-won resilience, as if it were an empty vessel just waiting for your brilliance.
You are basically erasing their history.
Exactly. We often confuse proximity with understanding. We think that because we rented a building in a neighborhood or because we walked the streets for an afternoon, we suddenly know the place. But there is a massive philosophical distinction here between the map and the territory.
Okay, let's pause there because I want to make sure we really grasp this. The map versus the territory. I've heard this phrase tossed around in tech and design, but how does the source material apply it to human beings?
Well, think about what a map is. A map is the data. A map gives you a bird's eye view. It shows you where the flood zones are, where the high-density housing blocks sit, what the median income is, and where the grocery stores are located.
Right, it's factual.
It is entirely factual. That is what is visible. But the territory is what that data actually feels like to live through on a Tuesday afternoon. The map shows you a low-performing school. The territory is the exhausted child carrying the weight of a fractured home into that classroom, and the teacher trying to hold that child's attention.
Oh, wow, that is such a vivid way to put it.
Yeah, data shows what is visible, but only local voices can translate that visibility into actual meaning.
Okay, I am trying to visualize this. It's like a doctor walking into an exam room and handing you a prescription before you've even opened your mouth to explain where it hurts.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Right. Like the doctor looks at your chart, which is the map, sees your age, your weight, maybe your previous condition, and decides they know exactly what's wrong. The medicine they're handing you might be top-of-the-line, FDA-approved, incredibly expensive medicine. But if you came in because you shattered your ankle and they are giving you a cutting-edge asthma inhaler because they looked at a chart from 5 years ago, I mean, it's the wrong cure for the wrong disease.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it gets right to the heart of the dysfunction. The medicine is objectively good, just like a funded after-school program is objectively good. But if it doesn't match the reality of the patient or the community, it is useless and frankly insulting.
Yeah, I would be pretty insulted if my doctor did that.
Right. And what's fascinating when you look at the underlying psychology of this, when you ask why we act like that doctor, it is rarely born out of malice. The author extrapolates that this presumption is almost always born out of fear.
Fear, really, because usually the people walking in with the big blueprints seem incredibly confident, almost arrogant. Where does fear play into it?
It's the fear of the unknown, really, and the fear of appearing incompetent. Think about it. If you are a leader, a manager, or a community organizer, you are expected to have a vision.
Yeah, you are supposed to be the one with the plan.
Exactly. You are paid, or at least culturally expected, to have answers. Sitting in the messy, vulnerable, undefined ground of true presence, looking someone in the eye and saying, "I don't know what you need yet. Please tell me about your life." That is terrifying.
It really is.
We fear wasting time. We fear losing clarity. So rather than sitting in that vulnerability, we rush to the safe ground of explanation. We offer plans when what people actually need first is our presence. We offer solutions when what they desperately need is understanding.
If you're listening right now, think about how this plays out in your own life. When a friend calls you crying about a breakup or a disaster at work, what is your first instinct? For a lot of us, it's to immediately offer a 5-step plan to fix it.
Oh, absolutely.
You should text this, you should update your resume, you should call HR. We rush to fix it because sitting in the discomfort of their pain, just listening, makes us feel helpless. We substitute the illusion of efficiency for the deep work of understanding.
And the text notes that this urgency to fix things from a safe distance completely misses the pattern of how deep, redemptive work actually happens. The author points out that in the biblical narrative, God is consistently portrayed as a God who hears before he acts.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's that famous moment at the burning bush where God says, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people and have heard their cry." Before the grand deliverance, there is divine awareness. The incarnation itself is described not as a deity shouting advice from the clouds, but entering the neighborhood, moving in, asking questions, and paying attention to what the powerful ignore.
So if we accept this premise, if we realize that our blueprints are a trap, that the map isn't the territory, and that we have to, put away our pride and actually ask the locals for directions, the immediate question becomes, who exactly are we talking to? Because if I walk out onto a street right now, I'm going to find 100 different people.
Right, and that brings us to the profound realization that a community is rarely spoken with one voice. The author introduces the concept of polyphonic truth.
Polyphonic truth. Many voices. Meaning, if you just go to the mayor or the loudest person in the room, you aren't getting the truth.
Exactly. If you only speak to the official leaders, the city councilmen, the head pastors, the prominent business owners,
Yeah.
you are going to get what the text calls a curated reality.
That curated reality. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not that these leaders are intentionally lying to you, but they are giving you the polished official version of the neighborhood. They are giving you the PR pitch or the systemic overview. Truth in a neighborhood is polyphonic. No single perspective, no matter how educated or experienced, exhausts the reality of a place.
So we have to assemble a chorus. But if you're trying to really understand a place, interviewing every single resident is impossible. The text gives us categories of people we need to seek out. Let's group these perspectives because comparing them is where the real insight happens. Let's start with what we might call the historians versus the future.
That's a great way to frame it. The historians are your long-term residents and your elders. The author emphasizes that these individuals are the keepers of a community's moral memory.
Moral memory, I like that.
Yeah, they remember what the place used to be before the new highway cut it in half. They know what was promised by politicians 2 decades ago and what was never delivered. They remember which local businesses vanish and what cultural glue once held the block together.
They see the whole timeline.
Precisely. The elders specifically carry the moral grammar of the community. They know what forms of respect still matter and what kinds of speech can heal a specific cultural wound.
And in tension with those elders, you have the youth, the teenagers hanging out at the corner store or the skate park. Why is their voice just as critical?
Because the youth are the future already speaking. The author points out something brilliant here. Young people perceive the emotional climate of a place long before adults name it.
Oh, that is so true.
Right. Adults are often too busy surviving, paying bills, and keeping their heads down to notice the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. But the youth know exactly where meaning and hope are leaking out of the community. If you don't listen to them, you won't realize that trust and imagination are eroding until it is far too late.
That makes so much sense. I remember being a teenager and being hyper aware of the tension in my house, even when my parents thought they were hiding it perfectly. Teenagers have this crazy radar for authenticity and despair.
They really do.
Okay, so we have the elders and the youth. Let's look at another cross-section, the ones operating in the middle of the chaos. The teachers and the parents.
Teachers are an incredible demographic to listen to because they stand at the absolute collision point of home life, public policy, childhood trauma, and human aspiration.
Wow, the collision point.
Yeah, they see the hidden burdens that children carry. A community organizer might only see a child at a weekend festival smiling and playing. A teacher sees that same child on a random Tuesday morning, exhausted, because they are secretly parenting their younger siblings or carrying the emotional shrapnel of a fractured home.
And what about the parents themselves?
Parents know the exact localized reality of what the author calls the daily cost of caring. They know exactly where fear enters ordinary life.
Give me an example of that.
Well, a politician might look at a map and say, crime is down 2%. A parent says, I still can't let my kid walk past the intersection of 4th and Elm because the streetlights have been out for 6 months and the cars speed around the blind corner.
Right. They know the reality on the ground.
Exactly. They know which institutions can actually be trusted and what it physically and emotionally costs to keep a family afloat in that specific zip code.
Let's add one more layer to this course. We have the macro view versus the micro view. The civic leaders versus the everyday workers and the existing helpers.
Civic leaders give you the macro. They see the structural constraints. They know where the municipal budgets fail, how the zoning laws are restricting growth, and what bureaucratic red tape exists. Their view is vital, but the text heavily warns that if you don't pair the civic leader's voice with the ordinary resident's voice, you just end up with systemic explanations devoid of lived human pain.
And the workers provide that human pain. The text specifically mentions janitors, bus drivers, street vendors.
The workers provide the rhythm. A market vendor who has operated the same fruit stand for 10 years or a bus driver who runs the same route every afternoon knows the unspoken flow of the neighborhood.
They see the patterns.
Yes, they know where the real social crossroads are. They see who comes and goes, what hours of the day feel tense, and how the community breathes. And alongside them, you have the existing helpers, the social workers, the informal neighborhood watch, the grandmothers who feed the stray kids.
The people already doing the work.
Right. They are the front line of actual need. They know exactly which families are slipping through the cracks right this second, long before it shows up on a city census.
Okay, play devil's advocate here with me for a second, because this is where my brain starts to short circuit a bit. If I'm a listener who manages a complex team at work or I'm trying to start a community garden. This sounds completely paralyzing. I am interviewing the mayor, the bus driver, the exhausted teacher, the angry teenager, and the nostalgic elder. What do I do when their views completely contradict each other?
That is a very natural fear.
Because what if the civic leader says, this neighborhood is thriving economically, but the worker says we are all drowning in debt? Doesn't the youth's view of the neighborhood as a boring prison completely contradict the elder's view of it as a sacred home? How do you map a path forward when the compass is pointing north and south at the same time?
And that fear is why so many leaders prefer the blueprint. It's cleaner. But the text is explicit about this. Contradictions must be allowed to remain. You do not force a false consensus.
Wait, really? Just let them contradict?
Yes. A neighborhood can be simultaneously a place of wonderful, vibrant life for a teenager and a terrifying, isolating place for an elder who feels left behind by the changing culture. A street can be materially very poor, yet relationally incredibly wealthy.
So you don't take all these interviews, put them in a spreadsheet, and try to average them out into one neat executive summary.
Absolutely not. If you average them out, you erase the truth. The goal isn't to force an artificial consensus so you can write a neat mission statement. The goal is to hear the chorus in all its complex harmony and dissonance.
I love that idea of a chorus.
The author actually compares this to reading the Bible itself. The Bible gives us law, poetry, ancient history, prophecy, and gospel narratives. It speaks in many different literary modes because human truth is far too rich and multifaceted to be carried in one form alone. A healthy body doesn't ask the eye to do the job of the ear. You have to learn to tolerate and even appreciate the complexity of competing truths.
That is such a profound shift in mindset. But even if you manage to gather that diverse chorus of voices, the elder, the teen, the teacher, the worker, you can still completely ruin the interaction if you walk into the room with the wrong posture.
Oh, definitely.
Because asking the right people doesn't matter if you're asking the wrong questions.
Exactly. And the source text draws a very sharp line here between questions that close a door and questions that open a life. It explores the sacred art of asking.
Let's get into the mechanics of this. What is the difference between a closed question and an open question in this context?
Well, closed questions are usually yes or no questions, or they're questions designed to subtly confirm what the asker already believes. They are highly efficient for gathering specific data, but they are incredibly shallow.
Right.
Open-ended questions, on the other hand, invite revelation. They make room for memory, for nuance, and for meaning to emerge at the speaker's own pace.
The author gives a great warning here about something called the invisible agenda. Let's unpack that.
The invisible agenda is when you use an interview or a conversation to covertly steer people toward a pre-decided program you already want to launch.
So you already know what you're going to do.
Right. You are pretending to listen, but you are actually just hunting for validation. For instance, the text contrasts church-centered questions with neighbor-centered questions.
Give me an example of the difference.
A church-centered question asks, why do you think people in this neighborhood don't come to our church services? Or what kind of programs would make you want to visit our building?
Right, which immediately centers the institution. It makes the conversation entirely about us and our anxieties about our attendance numbers.
Precisely. It fundamentally assumes that the community's life should be measured by its relationship to your specific building or organization.
And a neighbor-centered question.
A neighbor-centered question, by contrast, asks, what is it like to live here? Or, when you think about your kids growing up on this street, what worries you the most? The first set of questions centers the institution. The second set centers the human being sitting in front of you.
It reminds me of watching a legal drama on TV. The lawyer is cross-examining a witness and says, isn't it true that you saw the defendant running down the alley at 8 p.m.? The lawyer isn't asking for the truth. They are leading the witness. They're asking for confirmation of their narrative.
That is exactly what happens.
If you walk into a neighborhood and ask a busy mother, don't you think this street really needs a youth tutoring program? She'll probably just nod and say yes to be polite or because it sounds nice. But you haven't learned anything about her actual life. You just use her as a mirror to reflect your own brilliance back at yourself.
And that is exactly what the text meant earlier by the sin of presumption. It's extraction, not listening. You are mining the community for data points to justify your grant application. The text points to Jesus as the absolute master of the open-ended question. There is this fascinating story where Jesus encounters a blind man named Bartimaeus. Jesus walks up to him and asks, "What do you want me to do for you?"
Which, on the surface, seems like an absurd question. The guy is sitting by the road and he's blind. The physical need is glaringly obvious. Why ask?
Because Jesus isn't asking for medical data. He is conferring dignity. He is refusing to treat Bartimaeus as a mere project or a predictable category of the disabled. By asking the open question, he is allowing the man to name his own desire, to exercise his own agency. And this leads to a profound warning in the text against a concept called premature translation.
Wait, premature translation, does that mean we're literally misinterpreting their language, or is it more about jumping to conclusions? Because as a problem solver, my instinct is to immediately categorize an issue so I can figure out how to fix it. I need to explain it like I'm 5 on this one.
Premature translation is the danger of rushing to put heavy academic vocabulary onto someone's raw pain before they have fully spoken it in their own words. It happens all the time.
Okay, give me a scenario.
Let's say you are talking to a young man in the neighborhood, and he says, "I feel like everyone just eventually leaves me behind." Premature translation is when you immediately jump in and say, "Ah, yes, you are experiencing the systemic disenfranchisement of macroeconomic urban flight." Or you hit them with a theological lecture on divine providence and how God never leaves them.
Oh, wow. I can feel how invalidating that is. You're taking their deeply personal, raw human experience and turning it into a textbook definition.
Exactly. When you do that, you have silenced them. You have asserted your intellectual dominance over their pain. The discipline of listening requires you to let people speak from the level of their lived experience in their own vocabulary and to hold that space without rushing to translate it into your professional jargon.
If we think about this in a corporate environment, it's like an employee coming to their manager and saying, I am drowning, I'm exhausted, I can't sleep, and I feel like I'm failing. And the manager immediately says, I hear you. It sounds like we need to optimize our cross-departmental synergy and implement a new agile workflow.
Right.
The manager thinks they're helping, but they just completely bypass the human being to talk about systems. The author calls this abstract compassion. Let's explore that.
Abstract compassion is a beautiful, dangerous trap. Abstract compassion loves categories. It loves talking passionately about the poor, or the marginalized, or the unreached, or the working class. You can write brilliant essays and design massive programs based on abstract compassion, but it completely fails to love specific individual people.
Because it's easy to love a category. Categories don't argue back. Categories don't have messy family dynamics or make bad decisions.
Precisely. Abstract compassion says all the right things about justice and care on a macro level, but it never becomes embodied enough to understand actual people with actual names and complicated histories. Open-ended questions force us out of the safe, clean world of the abstract and into the concrete messiness of real lives. Concrete love listens. Concrete love asks, what is your name, and what is it like to be you today?
So let's say we get this right. We sit down, we put away our clipboards and our invisible agendas. We ask the wide-open questions. Naturally, if we were there to help, our ear is tuned to listen for problems. We hunt for the deepest wounds so we can triage them. But the source material throws a massive curveball here. It warns that if we only look for the bad, we are committing a subtle form of violence.
This is arguably the most paradigm-shifting part of the entire document. The text insists that a truly restorative biblical vision of a community never looks only for wounds. It must equally look for gifts. Yeah, if you approach a community and you only ask about deficits, what is broken, what is missing, who is failing, what are the crime rates, you flatten the people there into nothing more than their problems.
You reduce them to their worst day. You turn them into a project to be solved rather than people to be known.
Yes. You must absolutely ask what is broken, but you must equally ask what is alive. And the author introduces this breathtaking concept of joy as moral evidence.
Joy is moral evidence. I want to linger on that phrasing. What does it mean that joy is evidence of morality?
It means that we often treat joy as if it's just frivolous or a luxury that people only get to experience once all their material needs are met. But joy actually tells the deepest truth about what a community loves, what it values, and what it has fought to preserve against all odds.
So give me an example of what that looks like on the ground.
Think about a neighborhood that struggles with poverty. An outsider comes in and only sees the boarded-up windows and the lack of a grocery store. But if you look for joy, You might see a deeply rooted porch culture where neighbors watch out for each other's kids. You might see a massive, vibrant local street festival that happens every summer. You might see a grandmother who insists on cooking a huge meal for the block every Sunday.
Right, the community's strengths.
These things are not side notes to the real problems. They are the soul of the place. They are hard evidence of grace, resilience, and immense social wealth.
If you only take a needs-only approach, the text warns about some severe consequences. It creates a savior complex for the outsider.
Absolutely. If a community is nothing but a list of deficits, then you get to be the shining knight bringing the light into total darkness. It breeds deep paternalism. And on the flip side, it exhausts the local leaders. If the local leaders only ever interact with outsiders regarding crises, funding shortfalls, and emergencies, they burn out because their entire identity becomes wrapped up in trauma management.
The author suggests a very specific sequence for having these conversations to avoid this trap. Sequence matters.
It matters immensely. The text says you must purposefully ask about joys first. You sit down with that mother or that teacher and you ask, what gives life to this neighborhood? What are you most proud of here? What do people go to celebrate? You anchor the conversation in their strengths. And only then, after the joy has been established, you ask about burdens. What threatens the good things you just named?
Okay, I have to jump in here and play the skeptic because I know there's a listener out there thinking, this sounds lovely, but if a house is literally on fire, you don't stand in the front yard asking the homeowner what their favorite memory of cooking in the kitchen is. You grab a hose. Isn't focusing on joy an absolute luxury when a community is facing severe poverty, gang violence, or an immediate crisis? Doesn't it seem tone-deaf?
That's a great instinct, and it's a tension the author addresses head-on. If there is an immediate bleeding emergency, yes, you perform triage. But community development is rarely a single burning house. It is a long-term ecosystem. The text asserts that the Bible constantly holds joy and burden together in the same breath. It quotes the Apostle Paul, who famously described his own experience as sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. It's a profound human paradox.
Yeah, that tension.
The author argues that refusing to see a community's joy implies that those people have no grace, no resilience, and no agency until the outsider arrives to save them.
Wow. So joy isn't a distraction from the fire. Joy highlights the very things that the community needs help protecting from the fire.
That is exactly it. If you ask about joy first, the burden is no longer just an abstract statistic on a map. The burden is understood as a direct threat to the life-giving things the community cherishes.
That is a massive perspective shift. Because if I ask you what your problems are, we are just talking about a negative. But if I ask you what you love and then ask what is threatening it, I have suddenly moved from being a savior imposing a fix to being a partner helping you defend your home.
Precisely. You become an ally to their joy rather than just a manager of their misery.
And understanding this delicate balance of joy and burden leads us to the invisible glue that holds all these things together, or the fractures that cause a community to fall apart. This is the underlying architecture.
The author calls this the hidden infrastructure of a community, and it consists of two primary elements: trust and belonging. You can have newly paved roads, fully funded after-school programs, beautiful new buildings, and a flawless organizational flowchart. But without trust, the community is brittle. It will shatter under pressure.
I want to stretch an analogy here because it helps me picture it. Think about building a house. Trust is the electrical wiring behind the drywall. When you walk into a beautifully finished home, you never stare at the living room wall and say, wow, the wiring in there must be magnificent. You compliment the paint job. You compliment the crown molding, the programs, the funding, the new buildings. Those are the paint job.
Right, the visible stuff.
But the second you plug a lamp into the wall and the breaker shorts out and the room goes dark, you realize that the beautiful paint job doesn't matter at all. If an organization comes into a neighborhood with a flashy new initiative but there's no trust, the power won't turn on. The program will sit empty.
And let's take that analogy one step further. What happens if someone in that house has been shocked by bad wiring in the past? What if every time they plug something in, it sparked and burned them? When a new electrician comes in with a new lamp, they don't care how nice the lamp looks. They are terrified of the outlet.
Oh, that is so true.
That is the reality of social capital. The author unpacks this by explaining that trust isn't just a sociological metric you can measure on a survey. It is built by memory. It is built by repeated, sustained experiences of care.
So a community's lack of trust isn't them being stubborn, it's them protecting themselves from being shocked again.
Exactly. People trust or distrust systems based on their historical memory. Who showed up when things got hard? Who disappeared when the funding ran out? Who made massive political promises and failed to deliver? Who actually stayed and listened?
The text links this concept of trust intimately with belonging, and it gets into some heavy theological concepts here. It talks about how Jesus created belonging. The phrase used is redemptive incorporation versus sentimental inclusion. Hold up. Redemptive incorporation. That sounds like dense seminary jargon. If I'm someone trying to organize a neighborhood block party to build community, what on earth does redemptive incorporation mean?
Yeah.
I need you to translate that for me.
It's a crucial distinction. Sentimental inclusion is when an organization or a church puts up a sign that says, "All are welcome." You leave the doors open, you smile at whoever walks in, and you pat yourself on the back for being friendly. But you haven't actually changed the power dynamics or the culture of your group to make space for them. You just expect them to assimilate to how you do things.
It's passive. It's saying, you can come to our table, but you have to eat our food with our manners.
Exactly. Redemptive incorporation, which the author sees modeled in Jesus, is active and transformative. Jesus didn't just stand in the synagogue and say, "Everyone is welcome." He actively crossed social boundaries. He went to the margins. He called the overlooked by name. He ate meals at their tables. He touched the people considered ritually unclean. Redemptive incorporation means the community itself is changed by the presence of the new person.
They don't just fit in, they change the group.
Right. You don't just include them, they become a vital organ in the body. And the text notes that the pain of exclusion is so severe because it teaches people to expect less from life. When people are repeatedly overlooked or only offered sentimental inclusion, they withdraw. They learn to survive by keeping their distance and remaining silent.
Which is why the author emphasizes that if we truly want to listen, we can't just wait for people to come to our town hall meetings. We must actively, intentionally look for those on the edges, the systematically overlooked groups. The text lists single mothers, informal settlers, people with severe disabilities, undocumented residents, and unemployed youth.
And there is a very strategic moral reason to seek out these specific voices. The author argues that the overlooked are almost always the best teachers of a community's blind spots. They experience the system as it actually operates, not as the PR brochure claims it operates.
Right. If I want to know if a building is truly accessible and welcoming, I shouldn't ask the architect who designed it. I need to ask the person using a wheelchair. They will know instantly where the ramps are too steep or the doors are too heavy, long before anyone else notices.
A single mother taking the bus at night knows the actual safety of a street far better than the police chief looking at a heat map. If you don't ask intentional questions to find these people, you will just automatically inherit the blind spots of the surrounding culture. You will build solutions that only work for the people who are already doing fine.
And this leads to what I think is the most haunting, challenging part of the entire text, hearing the unsaid. The author calls it the theology of silence.
It is deeply profound. In our culture, we tend to think of silence as empty space, a void waiting to be filled with chatter. The author argues that in a community, silence is almost never empty. Silence is highly communicative, and it is usually protective.
The protective of what?
Protective of dignity or safety or fragile hope. A mother might not mention the gang violence on her street to an outsider because she fears retaliation if word gets around. An elderly person might not mention their crushing daily loneliness because they want to maintain their dignity and not be seen as a burden. The text says a true listener must develop the ear to hear the unsaid.
How do you even do that?
Well, you listen for the flat tone of voice when a certain politician's name is brought up. You notice the repeated, practiced phrase that someone uses to deflect a question. You notice the topics that the whole room subtly avoids. These are massive neon signs pointing to the real territory.
You can't rush that. You can't just point at someone and say, "Why did you get quiet just now? Tell me your trauma."
No, and that is where the discipline comes in. The listener must have the patience to allow the unsaid to surface at what the author calls the speed of trust.
The speed of trust. That is so violently countercultural to the way we run modern organizations. Everything is quarterly goals, rapid deployment, agile sprints.
Because the speed of trust is slow. It requires the absolute renunciation of speed, the surrender of control, and laying down the vanity of wanting to be the hero with all the answers. You have to shift from mining a community to accompanying a community.
Mining versus accompanying.
Exactly. Mining assumes extraction. You dig in, grab the data you need, and leave. Accompaniment assumes a relationship. It assumes you are walking alongside them at their pace for the long haul.
I want to challenge you, the listener, right now, wherever you are. Look at your own workplace, your own family dynamic, or your own neighborhood, and ask yourself a few hard questions. Who is not in the room when decisions are made? Whose voice is routinely overlooked because they don't speak the corporate or acceptable language? Who has learned to stay silent because they've been dismissed or shocked by the wiring too many times?
If you start asking those questions, you are no longer just managing a space. You are beginning to practice the deep spiritual discipline of moral attention. You are beginning to truly hear.
Bringing all these profound concepts together changes entirely how we view our role in the world around us. We are coming to the end of our deep dive, and what an incredible journey it has been. We learned to abandon the trap of the blueprint, to ditch the map, and humble ourselves enough to enter the actual territory of people's lives. We learned how essential it is to assemble a polyphonic chorus of voices, the historians, the youth, the exhausted teachers, the everyday workers, and to sit in the tension of their contradictions without trying to flatten them into a neat summary.
We explored the sacred art of asking, learning the difference between closed, self-serving agendas and open-ended questions that confer dignity and draw out the heart, exactly the way Jesus did with Bartimaeus.
We balanced the scales of joy and burden, realizing that you can never truly help a community if you don't first understand what it loves and what it is fighting to protect. And finally, we learned to look for the hidden infrastructure of trust, to seek out the redemptive incorporation of the overlooked, and to have the patience to listen to the protective silence of the unsaid.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've talked extensively about communities, neighborhoods, and organizations, but this ultimately applies to every single human interaction you have. The text points toward incarnational listening as an act of profound repentance.
Repentance, turning away from our own pride.
Yes, it is a daily surrender of a presumption that we already know the answers. If that is true, then every conversation you have is a minor crisis of faith. The question is, are you willing to let the person sitting across from you, whether that is your spouse, your struggling coworker, or the stranger on your street, completely dismantle your best, most educated, most well-intentioned assumptions about them? The ultimate question isn't whether a community has something to teach you. The question is whether you will humble yourself enough to be a student of your own neighborhood.
Are you willing to be a student of your own neighborhood? To let the people around you be the experts on their own lives? That is the defining question. Remember, true understanding cannot be hacked, it cannot be rushed, and it cannot be downloaded from a spreadsheet. It moves at the speed of trust. You can't hand out a prescription before you know where it hurts, and you can't know where it hurts until you sit down and listen. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep listening, keep asking the wide open questions, and we will catch you next time.